All right. A lot of questions. Let's read through them. We start in 4 minutes. No more chats. Mike is correct. How do you pause chat? All right. How to mess your proof of work? Best thing is the Notion doc that has all the projects. Don't you change the class timing? Don't change the class. I'm not changing it officially. It was just today that I was out, so we had to change it. Going the right screen, we are. Someone sent a local host link to their Canvas project. That's interesting. Maybe they haven't gone through the DevOps classes until now. Notion doc, Notion doc. So we have another 2 minutes. Let me look at a few Notion docs and we'll go from there. Uh, which AI do you use to create thumbnails? So thumbnails aren't end-to-end generated via AI. Only my faces based on the impression that's expression that's needed. We use Fal AI for it. The same thing I've covered in the video, but other than that, a lot of manual effort on top of it. Cool. I'll take two more questions, then we'll call it. As in, then we'll start the class, then we'll not call it. Accelerator project probably looks good, and I mean, start with a bunch of ad hoc projects, and then start to get a little deeper. Andrew NG has a great course if you haven't seen it already. That you should go through. Accelerator. Let me just look at this after the class because these get a little involved as I'm looking at projects. So with that, let's start today's class, guys. Let me move myself to the screen here for the recording. Let me pin myself and let's look at the Docker slides. Do we have a Docker compose slides? Search doesn't work here really well. Well, let me search for Docker. There you go. So last week, we did. Let me switch back to the old UI. I don't like this new UI too much. Sorry, Keshav. Yeah. So last week we covered everything from here to networks. Only thing that was left was Docker Compose, for which I need to log in. So let me quickly log in. I'm a little worried the login will not work here. Hopefully that's, oh, see Daisy. Why am I logged in from out of all of my accounts? Projects.hydexdevs.com slash tracks slash docker dash 2. This is what we covered last week. Let me paste a link to the slides. But one thing we weren't able to cover was Docker Compose. That's the first thing we will learn today. Then we'll understand actually productionizing. I'm not saying this to everyone. I'm not. Productionizing a monorepo basically. Given you have a virtual machine, given you have a GitHub repository that is a complex monorepo with 2 front ends, 5 backends, and given you have Docker, how can you write a CI/CD pipeline that is automatically deploying from GitHub to Docker Hub, getting pulled to your virtual machine and redeploying the project? That is the bigger thing we have to do. The simpler thing we have to do is Docker Compose. All of this assumes that last week you already know, slash you've already covered. So if you weren't present there last week, I'm not going to go through all the points again, or we can do a poll if you want me to. So let's do a poll. Do you want me to quickly, in like 20 minutes, cover everything from step 1 to step 21? Do you want me to recap last week? Yes or no? Not a very aggressive yes, but still a yes. It's 62%, 61% yes, and 40% a no. So I'll keep it quick for the 60%, and I'll try to go through everything that we covered last week. And the last thing that we have to cover, not the last thing, there are a few other things we have to cover after this once we reach Kubernetes. But these are good enough to be able to start and running Docker locally. The last thing we have to cover is Docker Compose. I'll sprint through it. So, of course, this isn't enough. Last week's videos are much better than what I'm doing today. So let me take you through what Docker is, why do you need it? सबसे पहले we understood why Docker, why do you need Docker? And the answer is it is a containerization technology. It lets you containerize applications. Let me just take a screenshot of this. Let me paste it over here. There we go. So the first thing to learn was why Docker, and the answer really is that it's a good idea for you to containerize your apps. Why is it a good idea for you to containerize your apps? Because your apps will eventually be running in various operating systems, and developers are dumb and sometimes junior, and they don't understand the setup process is really difficult for them. But if you use Docker, the setup becomes very easy for them. This is why it is recommended. If you're starting an open source project today, you should go through their Docker setup and not through their normal manual setup. Then we understood what is containerization. Long story short, rather than running a specific process directly on your Mac machine, something like node index.js or whatever, cargo run or go run main.go or Python main.py, rather than running it directly on your operating system, directly inside your terminal, you run it inside what's called a container. So you don't run node index.js, you run something like docker run some image name. And this image internally starts node.js. What that does is, okay, if your project, let's say, is very weird and it's reading through your file system, if you have containerized the application, it will only be able to read through the container file system. If you have not containerized your application, then it's reading through your Mac's file system, which can be dangerous. So if you're ever running anything evil from the internet on your machine locally, don't run it directly here, run it inside a Docker container. That is one of many benefits that a container gives you. The other benefit is it is OS agnostic, so you can create containers for every operating system. And then people don't have to install Node.js first on their machine. They can simply install Docker and they can run your image. Docker run GTA 5 Windows, let's say. This is the only command they have to run, and GTA 5 will start to work for them. Versus they would have had to, if they would do it natively, they might have to install C++, then Rust, then clone the source code, then build the source code, so on and so forth. The steps are very heavy. But if you're running inside a Docker, then fairly straightforward. Then we understood the history of Docker, not important. Installing Docker, you should go through it. I'm not going through it again. Then we understood a little bit inside Docker. What does the Docker architecture look like? Specifically, we understood about the Docker engine, the Docker CLI, and the Docker registry. Today, registry will become important. Today, we will not need engine or CLI too much, but we will be needing the registry. Long story short, engine is a Docker process running on your machine that actually starts containers, actually builds containers. What is building containers we'll come to. But engines, the Docker engine is the main Docker process that is running. CLI is just a command line interface. So if you open a terminal and if you run Docker over here, this is the Docker CLI/command line interface. And lastly, the registry. What is the Docker registry? hub.docker.com. It is similar to github.com. Rather than pushing your code over there like you do on GitHub, what do you push on GitHub? Your source code. What do you push on Hugging Face? Your data sets or your models. What do you push on hub.docker.com? You push your images. So these are all the images that currently I have. For example, 100xdev/daily code staging, 100xdev/projects platform frontend, so on and so forth. These are all private images that I have pushed, similar to private repositories on GitHub. And the reason this will become useful today is because today we'll do an end-to-end deployment in a monorepo project. And when that happens, then as you can see, most of these things that you see over here are monorepo projects that are through a CI/CD pipeline getting deployed over here and then reaching a server. So that's the same thing we have to do today, which is why the registry is going to be important. Then we understood images versus container. Very short answer. What is an image? Anything that you find on hub.docker.com. For example, if I go to hub.docker.com/_/mongo, or if I clicked on any one of these, the thing that I'm opening is called a Docker image. This is the official MongoDB image. This is the official Postgres image. It's similar to source code on GitHub. You store your source code on GitHub. When you clone it and run it, you start a process. I repeat, what's present on GitHub is your source code. When you run it locally, when you run node index.js, you start a process. And similarly, what's stored on Docker Hub is what's called an image. It has your file system, network information, source code, dependencies, Node.js, Python, whatever you need, inside a single image so that anyone can run it without installing Python on their native operating system. What is an image? It has all the dependencies needed to run your project. For example, let's say we create a Accelerator clone today. So all the dependencies needed to run Accelerator, that includes Node, NVM, NPM, are present inside the image. And when you run the image, then the thing that is running is called a container. So if locally on my machine, I run the command docker run Mongo, then Mongo is an image. And when I run this command docker run Mongo, what started is a container. How can you see containers currently in your machine? Run docker ps and it shows you one container running. How do you see images? Run docker images and it shows you a bunch of images that I have running. One of them being Mongo that I just started, this one right here. Cool. This image I pulled 2 months ago. So 2 महीने से मेरे लैपटॉप में पड़ी है. Just like source code can be stored in your laptop for a really long time. Images can be stored in your laptop for a really long time. If you want, you can delete them. If you want, you can keep them. Great. Then we understood port mapping. So as to not, like if I explain this a little bit, then it will get confusing. So I'm not explaining this. Go back to last week's video and understand what port mapping is. It's important and something you should know. Then we understood some common Docker commands. So that includes things like Docker images, Docker ps, Docker kill, Docker RMI, and Docker exec. Again, last week's video is great. I would urge you to go there. Let me not explain them. The important ones are Docker ps to see all the containers, Docker kill, container ID to stop a container, like MongoDB is running for me right now. If I run Docker kill container ID, then MongoDB stops. And Docker images to see all the images, and maybe Docker RMI, the image name, to remove an image. I will have to force this, so let me -- force, and it says deleted. Whenever my classes are starting, a lot of times I don't have space in my machine, so I start to delete these images because I might not use them for the next, let's say 3-4 hours. So it's a good idea for me to remove them from my machine. How do I remove them? Docker RMI and the name of the image. Then we understood Dockerfile. This one's important. Every good project that you see, for example, github.com/cms, github.com/dub/dub, github.com/dailycode. All projects have, or github.com/ I'm opening 4 projects here. And you will notice all 4 projects in their root folder have something called a Docker file. This is CMS, it has a Docker file. This is dub.sh, it doesn't have a Docker file, but I'm sure I can find something. Let's see, installation. Let's look at their code base, sorry, organization, Docker, packages. I don't see a Docker file here. I would be super surprised if they don't have local development guide. Docker, there you go. So they do have a Docker compose file, which is something that, we're going to learn today. I'm just trying to find where it is. Seems like they don't have one. If you're already running Docker -- there you go. So they don't have a Docker file, but they have something called as a Docker compose file. This is the thing that we're supposed to learn today. So ignore everything I said or whatever. This project does not have a Docker file, but I'm sure in the Docker compose, they are building the code base locally. Let's see. There you go. They have a Docker file.dev. It's just not named Docker file. There you go. Oh, this is CMS. My bad. Where is dub.sh? Never mind. You get the idea. Some projects have them, some projects don't have them. If you look at cal.com, even they don't have it in their source code. I can't find Docker file somewhere in their root folder. but they have a separate repository for all of their Docker files. If I go to cal.com, open repositories, search for Docker, this is their repository that has all of their Docker files. So most projects will contain this thing called as a Docker file. Daily code at the very root has something called as a Docker file. This GSOC organization called P5JS Web Editor at the root fold has their Docker file. What it does is, I mean, I can go through the video, but long story short, it's used to specify how to build your project, how to build an image for your project. I repeat, one thing is to use MongoDB locally. When I run Docker run Mongo, when I run Docker run Mongo, I am running the MongoDB image locally. And one thing is to publish your own image, which is something that we have to do today also. Publishing your own image requires you to write a Docker file. So whoever wrote the Mongo image, let's say the author of MongoDB, also wrote a Docker file. And since we are writing our own source code, we also have to write a Docker file today. I'm not diving into the specifics of Docker file right now because last week we've done it, but would urge you to go to it. I think in both the videos we've covered this 2 times. Then a step around building images. Basically, after you write your Docker file, after you write this very long file, this syntax will be a little overwhelming if this is the first time you're seeing it. If this is the first time that you're seeing all of this, this will be a little overwhelming. But if you try to read through it, let me sprint through it. It has a few parts. From this base image, ignore arg for now. It's needed for next year's applications. We'll come to it. But this is basically a way to send an argument to a Docker file. From this Node.js base image, from this Node.js base image that exists over here, specifically the 20-Alpine version, if I go to tags and filter tags for 20-Alpine, somewhere here I can find it. There you go. There's 20.18-Alpine, 20.18-Alpine. So you can find 20 there you go. 20-Alpine. This also has a specific version. But similarly, this specific image you can find on Docker Hub. कि ये एक base image है. Base image क्या होता है? कि someone really smart pushed a base Node.js image. उन्होंने एक base Node.js image push कर दी. Base Node.js image का मतलब क्या है? कि an image that already has Node, has NVM, and which version of Node do they have? The one that our Docker file expects is the version 20. So given this starting base image, on top of it, we ignore what the work directory is. Again, go through last week's video. We globally install pnpm. We copy all the source code inside the container. We copy all the source code, whatever, index.ts, prisma.schema, mongodb.schema, or ts, so on and so forth. We copy all of this inside the container. That is what this command does. We run pnpm install. We run Prisma, npx Prisma generate, which is something you need if you are using Prisma. If not, then you don't need it. We build the project, we expose a specific port, and then we write the final command. This is the standard way to write a Docker file. If nahi samajh aaya, to last week we have covered this 2 times. So, you should go through it. I'm just quickly sprinting through what a Docker file is. All right, 5 more minutes I'll spend on last week, then we'll proceed. Then the next step is running images. That I already showed you. Docker run Mongo is a way to start the MongoDB image locally. And if you create your own image, then you can build your image by running this command: docker build tag my image with the name user app2, or you can call it whatever you want. Redux dev / for example, what repositories did I have on Docker Hub? On hub.docker.com, you guys saw I have a Redux dev / daily code staging image. So whenever I'm building daily code -staging, this is the command that I run to build it. And once I build my Docker image, then this is the command I can run to run it locally. Usually you don't use Docker to run projects locally unless it's a very complex project that you don't understand and you are a first time contributor setting it up locally. But apne khud ke projects that you're starting, rarely do you use Docker to run them. You run them natively on your machine. So this mostly happens in a VM, in a virtual machine. For example, all the projects that you see over here, webinar server, webinar front end, trade backend, project platform worker, these are all real projects. For example, project platform is quiz.100xsteps.com. Webinar front end is webinar.gg, and algo sweeper is algo arena-100xsteps.com. So these are all real projects. Inki image is built somewhere and eventually run on a machine. It is not run on my local machine, it's run on a virtual machine. So how do you run an image? Docker run and the name of the image. Now there are port mappings, networks and volumes here. जो मैं अभी cover नहीं कर रहा हूँ, we've covered them last week. But those are all important concepts. Passing in environment variables. How do you pass environment variables to an image? Some more Docker commands. Let's ignore for now. How do you push your images to Docker Hub? What is happening over here? 100x School, for example, is a repository with the image of which is used to run the school.100xsteps.com website. So, how do you push your images to Docker Hub? How do you see an image over here? Similar to how you push to GitHub is what we covered over here. This is an important concept that you should go through last week. Layers in Docker, optimizing Docker files, networks and volumes. These are important concepts. They are mildly complex, especially layers, networks and volumes. So all three of these I would urge you to go through last week. Now, with a bit of the recap for 23 minutes, let's get into today's class. There are two things we have to cover today. The first thing is Docker-Compose, which is the last thing really that we need to learn. Almost, last-ish thing we need to learn in Docker. And then we'll do something practically, create a monorepo and write a CI/CD pipeline to deploy it. This won't be very easy. The second thing that I've written here, especially since this is the first time you're writing it, like I've written it many times. But if this is the first time you're writing a monorepo deployment to a VM via CI/CD using Docker, I repeat, monorepo deployment to a VM via CI/CD using Docker. This is what we are doing today. And the other thing we are doing is learning about Docker Compose, which is this thing right here. The second thing is going to get a little complex and very practical, which means you will have to code and try to see if it's working or not in your GitHub. First thing is not too difficult, so let's finish that first. Let's understand what is Docker Compose. Abhi tak, the assumption is you understand what is Docker. Docker Compose is a tool designed to help you define and run multiple containers or multiple container Docker applications. I repeat, अगर आपकी एक monorepo है, if you have a monorepo, if you have a project, most probably it is going to have a front end and a back end. I repeat, whatever project you have is going to have a front end, is going to have a back end at the very least. Even a database. ये तीन चीजें तो होंगी ही, front end, back end and database. If you are expecting an end user, a new developer of your team, to join your team, how will you ask them to start the project? We learned last week that Docker is the best way to start a project. Use Docker, use Docker. But what will they do? Will they run three different commands? First, they will build the front end. Some command like this. Then they will build the back end. Then they will start the database, Docker and MongoDB. Then they will start the front end. Then they will start the back end. They will have to run 5 different commands. If they ever want to restart the project, they will have to find the specific container, stop it, restart it, so on and so forth. Looks a little ugly. What does Docker Compose let you do? It lets you start multiple containers together. So it should be very obvious as to why Docker Compose is a great tool for starting your projects locally at the very least. You rarely use this in deployment. I repeat, you don't really use this in deployment. Why? Because when you're deploying your projects, you don't really start MongoDB using Docker. That's not the best idea in the world to start your databases every time a deployment is happening. So these are more meant for local development. If you locally chala rahe ho and you have multiple services, let's say you have a backend and you have MongoDB, let's say you have a simple backend application. So create a Docker Compose file. What is the name of this file? Docker-compose.yaml. Have we seen this before? Yes, we saw it in a bunch of these code bases. If I go to code processing / p5.js web editor, in the root folder, what did I find? I found a docker compose.yaml, docker compose development.yaml. मतलब ये development में use करो, वो अगर production में deploy करना है, production में use करो. If you look at it, थोड़ा ऊपर से, it has two services. It has at the top level an array called services. Not an array, this is like an object in YAML. This is a YAML file. If this is hard to read, I would urge you to just convert this to JSON. If this YAML file is getting very hard to read, then just convert to JSON. So let's paste the YAML file here. And how do I convert it? There you go. This is the JSON representation of the same thing. It has two services, Mongo and app. Mongo runs the Mongo image from Docker Hub. It runs Mongo image version 5.0 from Docker Hub. This is the same as me running locally Docker run Mongo :5.0. So I can run this locally, or I can describe this in a Docker compose file. This is the actual Docker compose file. This is a slightly easier representation of it in JSON. And the second thing that MongoDB needs, if you remember from last week, is volumes. Whenever you are starting a database container locally, it is a good idea for you to mount it to a volume. What did we discuss last week when we were discussing volumes? कि जब भी आप container start कर रहे हो database का, whenever you are starting a database container, it is a good idea for you to attach it. If this is a database container, attach the folder that is actually storing the data. अगर आप MongoDB में data डालते हो, it actually gets stored over here. It is a good idea to mount that to a volume so that if the container ever dies, you restart the container and the data still persists. Whenever you are stopping a MongoDB container and restarting it, उसका data चला जाएगा. Containers are transitory. They don't really store state across starts. If I do a docker run Mongo, and then I do a docker kill Mongo, let's say, and then I again run Mongo, जो भी data इसके बाद डला था, whatever data I put after this goes away when I kill it, unless I create volumes, unless I mount this specific folder /data/db जो MongoDB का default folder है. This is the MongoDB default folder that stores the actual data. Unless you mount this to a volume, if you stop this, then this data will be lost. If it is mounted to a volume, volume exists outside the container. Even if you kill the container and restart, volume वहीं की वहीं रहेगी. Volume delete नहीं होती unless you explicitly delete a volume, unless you explicitly do a docker volume rm volume name. This volume will persist irrespective of this container going up and down. So databases में a very common thing you do is mount a specific folder जहाँ पे data होता है. Now for MongoDB that is /data/db. For Postgres that is something else. But you mount this to a volume so that that data persists across the restarts of this container. And the same thing these guys are doing. They have said कि ये specific volume को एक db data करके volume है. I want to mount it to /data/db. Similar to there is a volume over here that is mounted to /data/db. That's how they start MongoDB. They are able to create a compose file. What is a Docker compose file? A single file that has all of your services that you want to start. Now to start P5.js web editor, the project that we're looking at, you need MongoDB. उन्होंने कहा ऐसे start हो जाएगा. And you need your, whatever their application code is, which is this second thing right here. What is this second app thing? कि यार एक तो ये container start करना है. One, though we have to start this container. And second, we have to start this app container, which is not present on Docker Hub. Now MongoDB is present where? Docker Hub. That is why I have simply written image Mongo. But जो application है मेरी P5.js web editor, its source code is right here. This is the source code. This is the front end code. This is the back end code, client and server. So if I'm a new developer and I clone this, if I am a new developer, I want to contribute to this project, E5JS web editor, I will clone this project. After the project is cloned, I repeat, after the project is cloned, I want to start it. Now I can either do node-index.js or whatever, or I can use Docker to start it. मैं क्या करूँगा? अच्छा, this project requires MongoDB. I will first start MongoDB. Okay, Docker run Mongo. Then I will start to compile my project or build my Docker file. Okay, Docker build. There is a Docker file here, right? If you look at it, there is a Docker file in this P5JS web editor project. This P5JS web editor project has a top level Docker file. So I can build it. I can run Docker build over here. But that's two terminals where I have to run two commands. What is better is if I can run a single command called docker-compose up. ये single command क्या करेगी? This single command will look at the docker compose. So it will look at the docker compose .yaml. What you should do is docker compose -f, docker compose -development.yaml. I want to start this locally in development mode. मतलब मैं locally develop कर रहा हूँ इस code को. I am not actually running it in production. In fact, if you go through their docs, अगर आप इनके documentation में भी जाओगे, and you will search for contributor docs. Once you reach contribution docs, you will search for installation. यहाँ पे you will see there are two ways to install: manual installation, Docker installation. And Docker installation में they simply say ये run करो भाई, docker compose -f, docker compose development.yaml, not the production docker file, the docker compose file. They have two docker compose files. One is the production docker compose file, one is the development docker compose file. अभी के लिए हम development locally develop कर रहे हैं, तो we are worried about this file. इस फाइल में ऐसा है क्या? अभी we saw a while back. It number one has two services. It has a section called services, which is an object. First service is MongoDB. Find this image from Docker Hub. Attach this volume to it. The name of the volume is DB data. वो सबसे end में आपको दिखेगा कि they have also defined a DB data volume. I'll come to this section. Okay, what is this and how does it create a volume? But यहाँ पे they've mounted the volume as well. The second section is what we were discussing. The actual app. यार एक्चुअल ऐप ना वहां पे नहीं है, डॉकर हब पे नहीं है. इट इज इन दिस पर्सन्स मशीन. व्हेन आई एम रनिंग docker compose -f, this command, I want source code to compile from my machine, not from docker hub in some old version. कि मैं लोकली से रन कर रहा हूं, whatever changes I make locally I want to see. तो इट सेज यार आपको रीबिल्ड करनी पड़ेगी इमेज. फॉर द एक्चुअल सोर्स कोड, बिल्ड द इमेज, कॉन्टेक्स्ट इज ./ मतलब इस फोल्डर में बिल्ड करो. डॉकर फाइल इज कॉल्ड डॉकर फाइल, जो आपको रूट फोल्डर में मिल जाएगी. टारगेट इज डेवलपमेंट. ये क्या होता है देखना पड़ेगा, मतलब आई डोंट नो व्हाट टारगेट ओवर हियर मींस. वी कैन गूगल इट वेरी सून. एनवायरनमेंट वेरिएबल्स, MongoDB URL is mongodb://mongo:2717. The smart people will understand this, or people who paid attention during networks last week will understand this part. For everyone else, I'll share later why is this not localhost, why is this Mongo. Basically होता क्या है, in Docker Compose, all of these services are attached via a network. I repeat, whenever you are starting Docker Compose up, whenever you are using Docker Compose to start a project, that includes this and this, and I can add 10 different services here. I can add Redis, I can add Postgres, I can add Kafka, I can add a front end, I can add another backend. I can define multiple services here. Docker Compose का फायदा क्या है? It composes a bunch of Docker images, Docker files. It lets me run multiple Docker files together. So what did I have to run? A single command that will run multiple Docker images together, multiple Docker containers together. That is what Docker Compose does. यही पढ़ा था. What does Docker Compose do? Docker Compose is a tool to help you define and run multiple Docker container applications. How do you do it? By defining a Docker Compose. वही हम एक थोड़े production application का भी पढ़ रहे हैं. Wouldn't call it a production application. This is a fairly old and depreciated project. But we're still trying to read through it. कि हाँ, what is this Docker Compose file? And how can we create one of our own for our own project? कल को हम खुद का भी project बनाएंगे. We are going to create our own project. There also we want good developers to be able to run the project locally in 1 second. So how will we write a Docker Compose file ourselves? Now how have these guys written it? These guys have said एक service Mongo, एक service app. This app should build from this folder using the Docker file with this environment variable, with these volumes. Now, why have they created these volumes? There are multiple reasons for this. Biggest reason is if you want to have hot reloading in a Node.js project, you should add these bind mounts. And don't worry about what these are. अगर ये वाला part नहीं समझ आ रहा है, ignore for now. These are what are called bind mounts, but don't worry about them. Then the ports that you're exposing, and for example, do you remember port mapping? When you were running Docker run Mongo, we didn't run it directly. We added a port mapping. 27017 colon 27017. ये याद है? Similarly, this Docker file of this P5JS Fabricator project exposes 2 ports. 8080 probably for the front end. 8002 probably for the backend. So we have added those port mappings over here. And lastly, it depends on, which means कि इसको build करना, इसको run करना start मत करना. Don't start running this until this image runs, which makes sense. अगर MongoDB नहीं चली है, if MongoDB image hasn't started, then you should not start your application. That is what this depends on section does. And lastly, volumes defines all the volumes that you want to create. And in this case, we need just one volume called db data that is, used over here. That is the P5JS web editor Docker file. नहीं समझ, sorry, Docker Compose file. नहीं समझ आई? Let's look at a simpler one. Let's say I have my own, project, MongoDB project, that simple backend that connects to MongoDB. So there, let's try to look at the Docker Compose file there. And iske baad we'll write our own Docker Compose file. So we'll learn things there. First thing, at the top of the file, what is the version of Docker Compose you're using? It keeps on getting upgraded. As you upgrade to, let's say, 5.5 in the future, you might have more fields over here. Abhi ke liye, the version of Docker Compose that this file uses is 3.8. It defines 2 services, a MongoDB service, great. Image name, Mongo, great. That means whenever this Docker Compose file runs, under the hood, Docker run Mongo will run. Name of the container, MongoDB, which means -- name, MongoDB, that will run. Port mapping 27017, so -p 27017 colon 27017 will run. And lastly, volumes, MongoDB data, MongoDB underscore data is mounted to /data/db. So -v MongoDB underscore data colon /data/db. I can run this command manually myself, or I can create a Docker file जहां मैं सारे लिखे जा रहा हूं, and I have to run a single command, docker-compose up to start everything. तो ये आप पे डिपेंड करता है. If you want to write it manually, you can. What is the benefit of using Docker Compose? Single command, everything starts. As you have 10 different dependencies, as I said, Redis, Kafka, Postgres, Node.js, not Node.js, but another DB, MongoDB, Elasticsearch, your front end, 2 different backends, one WebSocket backend, one HTTP backend. A single file is nice where you defined everything. Rather than running 10 different Docker run commands, आप एक फाइल में सब कुछ लिख दो. Write everything in a single file and simply run this command to start everything. What will this command do? It will read through this file कि अच्छा MongoDB नाम की एक सर्विस स्टार्ट करनी है. I want to start a new service called MongoDB. This is the image I want to put from Docker Hub. So this is the image that I want to pull from Docker Hub. The same thing is mentioned over here. Mongo. This is the name of my container. This is the name of my container. This is the port mapping. This is the port mapping. These are the volumes. These are the volumes. That's the first image. An image that is present somewhere else. And then there is the second image called, let's say, backend 22. I don't know why I called it backend 22. Container name depends on everything here is right, other than the fact that this expects you to build an image yourself. What we saw on P5JS web editor was slightly better. Okay, you actually provide the build context over here, versus I'm unsure if this will work directly. We will see, but this looks wrong to me. I don't think this backend 22 images first needs to be explicitly built on my machine. Only, what do I mean by explicitly built on my machine? मतलब मेरे को docker build -t backend 22 dot. I first have to run this command, and then doing this will work. I don't think this will work without me explicitly doing this step. A better approach is what P5JS web editor has done. क्या द सेकेंड थिंग का पूरा डॉकर फाइल भी वहां उन्होंने लिख दिया कि यहाँ पे आपको मिलेगी डॉकर फाइल, so that whenever you start Docker Compose, it starts to build your project also. This will actually build your project. The slides expect you to have a backend to image already. So whenever we create our project, this is what we will do. We'll use this specific build context to actually start it, rather than assume the user has a backend to image. And lastly, volumes. Okay, whatever you write over here, volumes is again an object, and this object has one key over here which has no value. It's, if you look at the YAML to JSON conversion, wherever I did it, YAML to JSON conversion, maybe, there you go. If you look at the YAML to JSON conversion, volumes DB data null. Just having this key is good enough to run the command यहाँ पे docker volume create DB data. So whatever volumes you are going to use, could be many of them, all of them you have to define here at the end. That's port mapping, volumes. That does not cover one thing called networks. I repeat, what were our complex concepts that we learned last week? There were networks, volumes, and layers. Volume हमें समझ आ गया hopefully, and port mapping also. Port mapping hopefully straightforward. Volume hopefully थोड़ा समझ आ रहा है. Network, one very important thing about Docker Compose files is if you start multiple containers, if you define multiple services, they are all automatically connected by a network. What did we learn in the networks last week? A network is used to do something like this. A network is used to connect two containers together so that one container can talk to other container. You have to explicitly start it. You have to create a new network. You have to run, just like you have to run docker volume create, you have to run docker network create and the name of your network. So if you were not using Docker Compose, आपको ये करना पड़ता, you would have had to do this. If you are using Docker Compose, then all of them are already connected by a network. All the containers that you are starting are already connected by a network, and that is good because they can already talk to each other. How can they talk to each other? If you remember from last week, how can this backend connect to this MongoDB cluster? What would the URL be? Would it be localhost? The answer is no. It would be the name of this container. How does one container talk to another container? How do you find what is the DNS or the IP of the other container in this container? It is the name of this other container. This container का नाम क्या है? MongoDB. And hence, what are you trying to connect to? Not localhost. You are trying to connect to MongoDB. This is something we covered last week in volumes. तो अगर नहीं समझ आया तो वहां से समझ आ जाएगा. So this single Docker file has two images, port mapping, volumes, and networks. सब कुछ एक single file में. A single file has everything. Why is that good? That is good because whenever a new developer joins your project, just like if you today join P5JS web editor and you go to their contributor docs, there is one very long and ugly way to contribute. I repeat, if you look at the installation, there is one manual installation section, very hard, too many steps. Then there is a Docker installation where you just have to run Docker compose -f, the name of the development file, and then up. This single command will start the front end, the back end, MongoDB connected together with a network with volumes locally. That is why you want to use Docker Compose. Docker Compose समझ आया? Let's do a poll. Do we understand the Docker Compose file? अभी practically भी करेंगे. We'll create a quick, maybe Postgres project, maybe Prisma project, or MongoDB project, and try to code it. And create a Docker Compose file for it. That looks more than enough. Wow, that's simple enough. So let's do this. Let's start with a simple non-monorepo project. Or just let's start with let's start with a simple one. A simple backend that connects to Postgres via Prisma. That's our most popular use case abhi tak. Or do you want to Mongo? I don't know. Let's do Postgres Prisma, thoda slightly fancy project. And if you understand that, it will be easy for you to understand a Munstack project or a MongoDB project also. So let's all initialize an empty backend project. I'm going to call it, I think we're on week 27 or something. Week 27 Docker Compose. Inside week 27 Docker Compose, let me create, here that's fine. Let's just initialize the backend for now. So npm init-y to initialize a package.json. Now let me open this in either Visual Studio Code or Cursor. You can pick either one. I'm opening it in Cursor. I'll not use any of the AI bits, but the color theme I have over here is slightly better. So package.json looks something like this. What is the next step? Let's say we have to add TypeScript also over here. So npx tsc --init. It gives me an error, which it should, because I haven't first installed TypeScript. So npm install TypeScript followed by npx tsc --init. That initializes a tsconfig.json for me. Yahan pe, let me change the root dir to /source, the out dir to /dist. Let me create a source folder and let me add a index.ts file. So I've done a few things. Let me recap them. I created a fresh folder called week 27 Docker Compose. One second, I think I'm connected here. You guys will probably disconnect with me for a second. All right. I created a fresh folder called week 27 Docker Compose. I ran npm init-y to create package.json, npx tsc --init to create tsconfig.json. I changed root dir in tsconfig to /source. I changed out dir to /dist. And lastly, I created a source/index.ts file. These are steps we have anyways followed for a really long time in various places. So hopefully this is not too hard to digest. Let's say this is a simple Express project that connects to a Prisma server. So npm install Prisma and Express and add types /Express. And if you don't like Prisma, you don't have to use Prisma. Use the PG library. Use the MongoDB, Mongoose library, connect to MongoDB. It really depends on you. You should have a backend, you should have a database, and that's it. You don't need anything else to create what we're creating right now. So don't necessarily feel stuck to use Prisma or a different ORM or ODM or whatever. Cool. I installed Express. Let me quickly write some code. Import Express from Express. Const app equal to Express. App.listen 3000 and app.get res.json message get endpoint, and then another, let's say, post endpoint to create some data. So this is to get some data, this is to create some data. Everything is good. Only thing is we have not yet connected to a database. So let's add the Prisma logic to actually connect to a database. So next up, I'm going to do a npx Prisma init. This will initialize a Prisma file for me over here, Prisma/schema.prisma. Let me remove all of this. Let me add a basic user model with ID, string at ID at default UUID, username string, password string. Let's keep it as simple as that. Let's say this application only has a single user table that is supposed to do a few things. That's it. What would the get endpoint do now? Get the user details. Post endpoint, create a new user. Very simple CRUD application. Okay. Now comes the step of how do I test this locally? Abhi to I have not written any code. So let me finish the code. Let me run npx Prisma migrate to migrate the database. अब इसके लिए I need a database. मेरे पास तो database है नहीं. I need to run npx Prisma migrate dev to actually migrate my database, actually create tables in it. But I don't have a database right now. तो क्या करूँ मैं? चलो temporarily let me start a database using Docker. Let's say I'm the first developer of the team that is tasked with creating the project and the Docker file and the Docker Compose file. So I unfortunately have the burden of initializing Prisma and creating the migrations for the team. तो अभी के लिए I'm going to start it manually. Docker run -p 5432:5432 Postgres, and there is a flag that you have to, or environment variable that you have to give, which looks something like this. Docker run environment variable. Postgres password is this. Run it in detached mode, matlab background mein. Run it with this port mapping, the same thing I had over here, and the name of the thing that we're starting, Postgres. This is a manual way to start Postgres. Eventually we'll come to the automated way using Docker Compose and everything. अभी के लिए मेरे को locally इसको start करने के लिए मैंने कर दिया. This is the command that I ran to run it. Docker run environment variable. This is the password, detached mode. This is the port mapping. Postgres is what I'm starting. It started Postgres. Notice it started and immediately exited. Why? Because I'm running it in detached mode, because I added -d over here. Okay. Postgres is running for me locally. Now I can go to .env. I can go to .env and replace this with my local Postgres credentials, which is Postgres is the username. My secret password, whatever was this environment variable that I passed, is the password. Locally is where I'm running it. 5432 is the port, and Postgres is the name of the database. That is how I would change my Postgres connection string. And if all of this is complicated, go to neon.tech, get a database URL from there, paste it over here. All of this is just as a first step. क्योंकि अभी हम project start कर रहे हैं. We are just starting the project. We need the migration files to be generated. What are migration files? The files that get generated when I run npx Prisma migrate dev. When I run this command and give my migration a name, let's say init, it creates this migration folder. It creates this init folder with a timestamp. It creates this migration.sql file, which has this create table query. This migration I had to do once, so I needed a database for once. मेरे को मिल गया database, मैंने ये create कर दी. Now I can stop the database also if I want. If I want, I can stop the database. मैं अभी के लिए on रख रहा हूँ, मैं बंद कर दूँगा. But just to generate this migration.sql file once, I started the database locally, and that is why I did not use Docker Compose. इसके बाद everyone will use Docker Compose. No problem, in doing that. ठीक है. What is the next step? npx Prisma generate to generate the client. And now I can add the CRUD functionality here. I can write at the top const Prisma client equal to new Prisma client await Prisma client dot user dot create username, let's say math dot random dot toString, password math dot random dot toString. Like nothing too complicated. Sorry, what was this field called? Oh, sorry, data and then email and password, or username and password. Here is my simple get endpoint. What is the get endpoint supposed to do? It is not supposed to create, it is actually supposed to get. Let me move this logic to the post endpoint. I repeat, ये logic मैंने post endpoint में डाल दिया. In the get endpoint, I'm going to get data. Const data equal to this thing. Dot find first, let's say, or let's say find all, find many. Let me just return this data. So basically very simple CRUD endpoints. This one to get everything in the users table in the database. This one to create a new entry in the users database with some random username and some random password. We have an application that requires a backend. It requires a database. Now the question is, what should be the setup procedure? What should you write in readme.md or contribute.md? What should you write here? How can people start this? You can write manual installation steps. Here, number one, install Node.js locally. Give a link to install Node.js locally here. Number two, clone the repo. Number three, install dependencies, npm install. Number four, run npx start the db locally. Give them a helper command over here. If you want to run it using Docker, then you can run this. Or you can also do this. Either run this or run go to neon.tech and get yourself a new DB. What else? Change the .env file and update your DB credentials. Then run npx prisma migrate. Then run npx prisma generate. Then run npm run build. And finally run npm run start. Manual installation steps बहुत लंबे हैं. Some 10 steps I had to write. One small thing I have missed. Okay, package.json में let me add a build script that compiles the project, and then a start script that runs node dist/index.js. This was one thing I missed. I've added it. Other than that, manual installation very hard. So what should be the second thing? The cool thing that we add, Docker installation. And here you can either use Docker only or you can use Docker Compose. Docker Compose is what we want to use because we have two services we want to start, a backend and Postgres. This might become 3 in the future, might become 4, might become 10. Docker Compose will make our lives a little bit easier because in a single command we'll be able to start everything. Versus अगर आप सिर्फ Docker use करोगे, then it will get a little hard. Let's write all 3 steps. Docker Compose installation steps. So let me push this repo and thoda I will also code, but also yourself try to complete this readme. This is a very heavy task, by the way. This is the job of a dev productivity engineer. What is, I always keep forgetting the name, but एक engineer या 2 engineer ऐसे होते हैं जिनका काम सिर्फ ये होता है. They have to keep checking dependencies, making Docker caches more optimized, build pipelines more optimized, making sure builds don't take a lot of time, making sure they're adding more tests and tests are covering everything, making sure all developers are able to move fast. That dev productivity engineer, even though it might feel like a very menial job, you're creating readme.md or contribute.md, but one small change here can make the life of a new developer very easy. can save, let's say, 10 hours for a new developer, which, you know, if it's a developer that's getting paid $100 an hour, that's $1,000 right there. तो ये चीज थोड़ी अजीब लग रही होगी कि हम readme क्यों लिख रहे हैं, but you know, readmes are important to write, especially when it comes to these things. Installation steps for new developers are super important. So let me post this repository. Can you try finishing the Docker installation, and then we'll try to finish together the Docker Compose installation steps. Let me go to GitHub. Analytic steps code 3. Week 27 Docker Compose public repository. Copy. Git remote add origin. Sorry, git init. To initialize a new repository, v.git ignore. It's already here. Git add.git commit hashem added initial part. Git push origin head. Now I'm also assuming this works. Maybe this doesn't work. I haven't really tested it. I suddenly realized. But most probably chota mota bug hoga to hoga. Other than that, this should just work. Alright, I've pushed the code over here. The thing we are supposed to do is, given our simple kiddie project for now, not a monorepo, we have to add good installation steps in contribute.md. That includes creating the Docker file for our project, creating the Docker Compose file for our project, and adding all the steps that a new developer needs to follow to be able to run it. Let's start by creating the Docker installation. Assuming the user does not have Docker Compose, user only has Docker, would the installation steps get a little easier? Would you still need these many steps? The answer is no. The steps would shrink down to this. Install Docker, start Mongo by running, start Postgres by simply running this command. Then build the image, Docker build -t user project dot start the image, Docker run -p 3000:3000 user dash project. So have my installation steps gone down from 7 or whatever this is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9 to 1, 2, 3, 4, yes sir, 9 steps से 4 steps हो गए. And Docker Compose में it will go down to how many steps? Install Docker, Docker Compose, run docker-compose up. That is it. So can you see the benefit of using Docker for making the lives of a new developer very easy? Yes, sir. A new developer might face a lot of issues doing this, or understanding Docker to start it. I mean, it's not too many steps. This is a very simple project. So ये भी चल जाएगा वैसे. In fact, there are benefits of doing this also. If you are not using Docker, तो थोड़े फायदे होते हैं. Especially hot reloading, things like these में. It's hard to get it running in Docker. It's very easy to do it here. Also, you just feel less anxious. Docker is a little bloaty. It'll start a new container. Running it natively is great, but बड़े projects में बहुत मुश्किल हो जाता है. It becomes very hard in a big project, which is why either Docker installation or Docker Compose installation. Now, the question is this enough or have we missed something? We still have to create our Docker file, right? We still have to create our docker-compose.yaml file. I have not yet added these two files that are needed. I'm installing the Docker extension. My cursor, which is the new IDE I'm using, does not have it. Installing. Taking a long time. No, installed, okay. Alright. So ये तो मैं बनाने भूल ही गया. I created the contributing.md file. I did not create the Docker file, the Docker Compose file. So can we create these really quickly? Docker file तो हमें आ गई है. From node:20-alpine. Then to do some optimizations, workdir पहले, workdir/app. To do some optimizations, सबसे पहले we do what? we copy what? Do we copy everything or do we copy a smaller subset? Do you remember this from last week? Do you remember this from the slides over here called optimizing Docker file? If not, you should go back to this slide of optimizing Docker files and understand a slightly more optimal way to copy files inside your Docker image. So copy package.json /package.json. Another thing you should copy is package log.json. Then you should run npm install. Then you should copy the rest of the files. Then you should run npx prisma generate to generate the client. Run npm run build to build the project, and then finally cmd npm start. Does this seem sort of straightforwardish? Ki acha, we have a base image, working directory, copy all the package files that includes package.json and package log.json, run an npm install, copy the rest of the files after that. Why? For layer optimization, if you remember from last week. Then generate the client. You might ask, Harkesh, why are we not migrating the client here first? Why do we not run npx prisma migrate tab? And that's a good question. We should run this. There is no downside of running this. We should run npx prisma migrate tab. Yeah, that is fine. And maybe one more thing we should do is add an environment variable here called database URL equal to this. Yeah, this you can specify environment variables, especially these simple environment variables. There's nothing super secretive here. This is a simple my secret password जो आप locally ही run कर रहे हो. There's nothing to hide here. This is not my production database URL. This is not my production database, whatever URL. It's a simple string over here. You'll be fine. Environment database URL equal to this. npx prisma migrate dev and npx prisma generate npx prisma build. npm run build. And then finally npm start to start the project. That's how you create a Docker file. Sort of. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I don't think see anything wrong here. We'll see. That was the other thing you had to do. Create the Docker file. I mean, run करेंगे. हो सकता है कुछ bugs में इसमें. I might be missing something. I have created contribution.md. Manual steps do not require any Docker. This step requires Docker and requires Docker file. Docker file हमने लिख ली. अब नहीं समझ आई तो last week पढ़ लेना. Last week we discussed this in fair detail as to how you create a Docker file. Let's try to build the Docker file and see does it work. Before that, let me also take a pause here. I think I've said too many things together. So I just want to make sure we're all on the up and up. And are we good to go? Do we understand the Docker file and the contribution.md file that we're trying to create? And then eventually we'll understand Docker Compose also. But is this good? Can I proceed? Yes or no? If the answer is no, then I'll take a pause and look at Q&A. The answer is yes, then I'll keep proceeding. So let me start a new poll. Are we good to go, guys? Small सा ही मतलब एक section है. 80% says good. So to 80% I would urge. Let me push this also. I am sure this will not work in the first run. I'm missing something obvious. I have a feeling. Added Docker file. So I would urge you to clone this project locally. I repeat, I would urge you to clone this project locally and try to finish it. What you have to do is finish the docker compose.yaml file and finish the Docker file. In case there is something missing here, there might not be anything missing, but just basically try it out and see and tell me, whether or not I've missed something. I'm looking at Q&A for like 3-4 minutes, then I'll start doing the same thing myself. The link to the repository is this thing right here. So let me paste this in the chat and you guys can, if you want to, try to finish this locally before I do. And meanwhile, I'm going to look at Q&A. What is the difference between tag and name? Name is a local thing. Name is used when you're starting the container. I repeat, you use docker run -- name Mongo. MongoDB container Mongo. That's the name. -t is a tag for the image. Docker build -t Mongo underscore image colon latest or colon version 1 or colon version 5. So one thing we haven't really discussed is okay, actually this is the name of the image and this is the tag of the image. If you go to hub.docker.com /_/node, let's say, so you will find it has a bunch of these tags. Name of the image is still node, but it has this hydrogen alpine 3.2.1 tag. It has this 18.20.6 /alpine 3.20 tag. तो जब भी आप इमेज क्रिएट करते हो राइट, आप इमेजेस के मल्टीपल वर्जन्स बना सकते हो. ये होगा ही, यू विल क्रिएट मल्टीपल वर्जन्स ऑफ योर एप्लीकेशन बिकॉज यू विल डिप्लॉय इट एवरी डे और एवरी अदर डे. तो you should always tag your image. We haven't done that until now, and the reason for that is if you don't do it, so it automatically gets tagged to latest. But ideally you should put a tag over here 1 2 3 or whatever v1 v2 v3 so on and so forth. And when we reach the CI/CD part, we'll understand what can you put over there, what is the special string that you can put in every commit. But yeah, that's the difference between tags and names. Q&A. मेरी टीम एक्सेस कोहोर्ट टू डेवऑप्स क्लासेस. यश एक बार अंकुर को बता देना darshan.nd12@gmail.com what you see on screen right now. Needed access to cohort 2. So we don't need to do npx prisma init. I thought I did. Oh no, you don't have to do npx prisma init. That command only creates prisma/schema.prisma folder जो हमारे पास ऑलरेडी हम कॉपी कर रहे हैं. I repeat, schema/ when we run this, we already copy the Prisma folder. npx prisma init creates the same thing. So there's no right point redoing it, right? So no, you don't need to run npx prisma init inside the Docker file. The port thing is missing IG. So the good thing is, yeah, you make a good point. I forgot expose 3000, but this is actually not needed. It's a good thing to add. In the old versions of Docker, it was needed. Now it is just used for documentation. कि यार 3000 पोर्ट खुला होगा, वहां पे कुछ चल रहा है. You actually don't need it. इसके बिना भी it will work. If you don't write expose 3000, it does work without it as well. But it's a good thing to add for purely documentation purposes, and it doesn't do anything substantial or actually open the port in this thing. How are we injecting variables in the Docker file? So thankfully we don't have any secret environment variables here. We're doing local development. We're learning about Docker Compose. लोकली कुछ सीक्रेट नहीं होता. मेरा ही डेटाबेस है, मैं अपनी फाइल में डाल दूंगा. माय डेटाबेस, आई पुट इट इन माय फाइल. प्रोडक्शन में ऑफ कोर्स यू हैव टू इंजेक्ट डेटाबेस URLs. दैट विल अंडरस्टैंड व्हेन वी रीच द CI/CD pipeline as to how our application connects to the MongoDB or whatever the production Postgres server. अभी locally does not matter. If you want to, there are various ways to inject environment variables. For example, if it's not a secret, just put it in the Docker file. If it is a secret, then when you're starting the image, Docker run image_name. Just pass the environment variable, -e Postgres _URL equal to whatever it is, and then you're good to go. Oh god, so many same spam. How do we see local database data, the GUI? There are a few ways. One of them is, I'll show you. If you're using Docker, then run docker ps. Then you'll see, the container running. Then run docker exec -it, name of the container sh. We already know what this does. It lets us get shell access to the container. And then run psql -u postgres. I repeat, psql -u postgres. This doesn't give you GUI access, but it lets you run commands over here. For example, I can run /dt to see all the tables that I have, and I have a users table and a Prisma migrations table. I can run select star from user to see all the data in my users table. Actually, I have to run this. This is the default user table, and this is my Prisma user table. So it shows me I have no users right now, so on and so forth. So what did I do? I went inside my container, and then I ran psql -username postgres. Then I was able to explore my database. If you want a GUI, I'm sure Postgres has a bunch of GUI. pgadmin is one. So start pgadmin locally and give it the same credentials and you're good to go. All right. Let's proceed, guys. Let's see, does our Docker file work? So does our second way to build our application work? Let's see. Docker build dash t something. Some steps have been written over here. First step is to start Postgres locally. ये तो मैंने already कर दिया है. I was already running this locally, Docker PS. I am running Postgres locally. So this first thing I have already done. Second thing, let me try to do. Build the project. Starts to build it. Let's see, does it work? I would be super surprised if it works in the first go. That's like getting an AC on your first submission. Does anyone even do Codeforces anymore? Sidetrack. But isn't all of that, you give it to an AI and it returns? While this is building, I would just love to know. Is anyone doing Codeforces these days? Are these examples? Oh God. ENV, this thing. So people can just copy paste to an LLM. All right. That's weird. And very surprising. Like, how would these platforms, I guess, I don't know, there's probably a way to plagiarism checks eventually. NPX Prisma migrate dev failed for me. Why? Error while validating data source DB. URL must start with this thing. What does my URL start with? Docker file env. That looks right to me. env database URL equal to this thing. उसके बाद ही हो रहा है ना migrate dev. Maybe the environment variable only kicks in during, no, it does kick in during build time as well. Run echo database URL, not this. So if I run this locally, export database URL equal to this thing, and then I run echo dollar database underscore URL, it prints it. The same thing I'm trying here. Maybe the extra space was what was causing it, but let's try it out. Docker build. So I'm trying to debug it on your side as well. I would urge, unless this is feeling too fast, okay, ये तो समझ ही नहीं आ रहा मैं debug कहाँ से करूँगा, then leave it. But if you understand everything, then you should, run echo this thing. That looks right. Okay. Let's try this. Database URL equal to dollar database URL. NPX is migrate dev. Like when we're running the migrate dev script is when we pass in this as an environment variable. That doesn't work either. Oh, there you go. Now it's working. It's giving a very good error to you as well. Can't reach database at server localhost colon 5432. Why is that? When you are creating an image, तब भी क्या they can't talk across networks? I didn't think that was the case, but seems like there might be. So, एक bug आ गया guys. While we are trying to build the Docker file, there is a bug. What is the bug? You can clearly see. It says can't reach database server at localhost colon 5432. Even though I am running something on localhost colon 5432 on my machine. What my guess is, and I could be wrong, I think I'm mostly wrong here. Okay, my guess is when we are building the image is also running in some containerized environment, and hence it is not able to access localhost. But I thought that was not the case. That is the case, then we'll have to figure out how to get around this. But does anyone already know this? Has anyone already debugged this? कि इसमें क्या कमी है? What are we missing here? npx it is trying to connect to network, वही है. हाँ, तो ये तो डॉकर कंपोज में भी बहुत इश्यूज देगा. This is going to give us a need to run Postgres in the build file. It's considering .env. Both of them are the same. .env, put dbrand.env. It's already there. Password is the problem. No, that's fine. My secret password. Like I'm really trying to hope. My secret password. No, that looks right. Network hai. So time to Google, guys. So the problem is one thing that exists with Prisma that does not exist with ROP Postgres or MongoDB is हमें build pipeline में भी database से बात करनी है. This leads to a lot of errors. जब हम Next.js में पहुंचेंगे तब हम देखेंगे. जो arg में दिखा रहा था आपको पहले argument that we'll see, it will come back later when we reach Next.js deployment using Docker and Prisma. The problem right now is most of the times you don't have to run any database interactions in your build file. It is just building your code base. But our code base, unfortunately, needs to actually, we can actually get rid of the migrate dev step. Simple enough. Can we? Probably can't. So let's keep it here. But basically, ये step की जरूरत नहीं पड़ती MongoDB में. If you're using MongoDB and Mongoose, you don't need to migrate your database. It's schemaless. खुद हो जाता है बाद में. If you're using the PG library, then also you can do it before the Docker file is built. The way we are doing it right now, since we unfortunately have to run this command to generate the client, we sort of have to talk to the database. Even though अगर हम इसको comment कर देंगे तो भी काम चल जाएगा. But let's try to figure it out. Let's try to figure out how can we migrate the database locally. And I guess the answer is, as some of you said, we will have to use the network. But how do you use the network during build stage? I don't know. This is the first time I'm seeing this. Can you use network in Docker build? You can connect running containers to attach a network to Docker build. Oh, seems like you can. Oh, simple enough. ठीक है guys, तो फिर तो simple है. We just have to make sure when we are building, we are using the network. तो यहाँ पे unfortunately the steps will increase now. Number one, start a new network. So Docker network create, let's call this user underscore project. And then whenever you're starting Postgres connected to the network user project, whenever you are building the image, surprisingly today I learned you can also pass a network over here, and whenever you're running the image also we will have to of course pass the network over here. So ये तीन चीजें हमें extra add करनी पड़ गई. We had to add the network. Why? Because when you are building the image, that is also running inside some containerized environment. It is not running inside my main host machine, so it can't really talk to localhost current 5432. अब शायद चल जाएगा. Let's try to see if I create a new network by running this command. Let me stop Postgres locally. Done. Let me start Postgres again, but this time Postgres is attached to this specific user projects network. Did I not create? Docker run -- network user underscore project. Oh, sorry, this is project and not projects. So let me change this as well. I've started Postgres locally, this time attached to my network. Now let me build a few things. वैसे सबसे पहली बात तो when we are starting Postgres, I should give it a name, Postgres user underscore app. And secondly, what was the error? Network mode user project not supported by BuildKit. Oh, great. So -- network name of this thing isn't enough. -- network equal to network name. Okay, let's try that. Nope, that doesn't do it. Yeah, what does Docker build dash dash network actually do? Node command. By default, Docker uses bridge network driver, which connects the containers to a network separate from the host. Oh, well, we can also do this then. Dash dash network equal to host. And that should have fixed everything. Yeah. So let's do that. No need of any networking, guys. Bach gaye hum. Thankfully, yeah, we can get rid of all of these steps, which makes sense. Like you shouldn't. That's why I was a little overwhelmed कि यार Docker installation इतना difficult होना नहीं चाहिए. Most Docker installation steps don't need a network. Today we had to add a network because we are using Prisma, and Prisma unfortunately talks to the database here. But thankfully, when you are building your Docker image, I repeat, when you are running Docker build, you can specify dash dash network equal to host. That means run on the host machine ka network. Build on the host machine ka network. Do not build on your own bridge network. Build on the host machine का network. And host machine के localhost 5432 पे तो चल रहा है ना कुछ. My host machine localhost:5432 is running Postgres. I of course can't connect to it from my browser, but I can connect to it from pgadmin or some other place because something is actually running here. So when I specify dash dash network equal to host, that should build it on my using the network of my host machine, and that should most probably fix the error. So let's change the build command over here. So ज़्यादा नहीं बदला कुछ. We did not have to make it extremely complicated. Only one thing we had to add was dash dash network equal to host. Now let's try to build it. There you go. Everything looks great, guys. लग रहा है Docker file बन गई है. The Docker file has been built, and hopefully, if I run Docker run. What was the name of my basically this last command? Docker run -p 3000 user project. एक problem हो गई, guys. We are starting two different containers, so they need to be connected via a network, right? So one thing we unfortunately have to add a network because we are starting Postgres separately. We are starting the image separately. If we remember from the networks class, last week, if you are starting a backend container separately, database container separately, they need to be connected via network to be able to talk to each other. And hence, we will unfortunately have to create a network. Docker network create user underscore project. We will have to assign the first container to this network and give it a name, let's say Postgres. And similarly, the second container that we're starting will also need you get the idea, attached to the network. This looks like the right steps now. One very obvious thing I missed, which I'm assuming a few of you were thinking, was कि Harkirat, we are starting it a separate backend process, a separate database process. They need to be connected to each other. ये तो हमने last class में पढ़ा है. And that's exactly right. And hence, create the network first. Start the Postgres container with the network with a name. Build the image, and then when you're running the image, then again, attach it to the network. Is this environment variable right now? During build stage, this environment variable is right. क्योंकि build कहाँ हो रहा है? Docker build is happening where? On the host machine, on the Mac machine. But when you do the command Docker run, when you start the project, तब database URL क्या होना चाहिए? What should the database URL be inside this container? Should it be localhost? No, right? What did we learn last week? Okay, when you are using networks, when you are connecting to different containers via a network, something like this, okay, there is this Node.js container that wants to talk to MongoDB. The way it connects is using the name of this container :27017. It does not connect to localhost :27017. it connects to the name of this container colon 27017. So today also, during the build phase, this environment variable is correct. But during the actual run phase, when you're actually running it, then database URL should be something else. Then database URL should be what? The original string, that is fine. But rather than connecting to localhost, which is myself, I want to connect to the name of the other container. What is the name of the other container? Postgres. So I will not have this local host string over here. I will have Postgres over here. Now it should work. Let's see again. Very ad hoc. Might work, might not work. Let's try it out. Let me stop everything. Docker ps. Docker kill container ID. Docker. That's fine, I guess. Let me first create a network. I think I already created this, so I don't have to recreate it. If I recreate it, it says network already exists. Great. Then let me start Postgres locally. Seems like it started. Then let me build my project. Seems like it built. Then let me start my image. Seems like it is working. Let me try going to localhost colon 3000 and I see data empty. मतलब database से connection हो रहा है. And let me try to go to Postman and try to put some data. Let me send a post request 5 times. Now if I go to the get endpoint, I see 5 different entries in the database. So my CRUD application now runs locally purely using Docker, not Docker Compose, Docker. And the steps we have defined in this Docker installation steps. Now comes the main thing for today, the thing that we were learning, Docker Compose. And thankfully, ये जो network हमें डालना पड़ा ना बहुत गंदा, this network host that we had to add and the, what do you call it, network user project that we had to add and the network that we had to create over here. We don't have to do all of this in Docker Compose. But before we reach Docker Compose, let me push this Docker installation steps. And we'll do a poll. And then we'll move on to Docker Compose. As you can tell, there are a lot of small issues that come in that you have to debug whenever you are the developer productivity engineer of a team. The good thing about being that engineer is your code is never in production, it's in a readme file. So rarely do you have outages. But the bad thing is, it's very hard to make it work on every machine and have, the right set of steps for every engineer so they can deploy things on their local machines. Cool, let's do a poll. I've pushed the code. Do we understand this second section of Docker installation? पहले we wrote a Docker file and we were able to sort of make it work, but थोड़ा फट गया था. And now we were able to fix it by adding the network. ठीक है. 80%, 78%. So I will take a pause, and everyone who understood this, I would urge to now finish the assignment and create the Docker Compose file. थोड़ा references you have. थोड़ा we've looked at the slides today. So can you try completing Docker Compose? मैं भी कर दूंगा in 10 minutes. But let me look at Q&A for like 5 to 10 minutes, and then I'm going to proceed. All right. Any questions or recap, or what do you guys want? What is none in Docker images? They are the layers. Whenever you Docker images, these are all untagged layers. For example, whenever you're trying to build, let's say this, if you remember, there were layers in Docker. A lot of these are, untagged layers that build on top of to finally create this specific 100x steps class 2 image. Is it possible to apply Docker on React Native app and create the build through CI/CD to push it to Play Store? So you can't really push it to Play Store. There are ways. There is something called Expo that has tried to build something closer to what you want. But unfortunately, there is a very heavy review process when it comes to pushing to App Store or Play Store. So you can't really connect it to your CI/CD pipeline. Most of the times there are manual publishes. You don't publish it via a CI/CD pipeline. Why? Because anyways 4 दिन उसको review करने में लगेंगे. It will take 4 days to review. And if you push something wrong there, you are stuck for the next 4 days until the next review happens. So that is why you don't really push it to a CI/CD pipeline. But what you are asking, deploying through CI/CD to somewhere, you don't really deploy it directly to Play Store, but you do deploy these builds. If you've used Expo basically, so over there you can do it. Everyone in your team can access or install an Expo app, and everyone will get direct GitHub say pushes to your Expo app. But when you're deploying to production, which means the actual app, then you don't do this. Cool. Why building on host and not that on the network? So great question. Why did I add this, which is one jarring thing that we just added? Why did I change the build command to have -- network equal to host? Let's try to debug this part or understand this part. I changed our build command to be this. Why? Because this is my Mac machine. I already had a container running for Postgres. And when I was building, I repeat, when I was building my project, Docker build जब मैं run कर रहा था, that build was also happening in a container where it was trying to access Postgres on localhost :5432. Now on localhost :5432 कुछ run कर रहा है क्या? Is anything running on this new container that is trying to build the project? The answer is no. I think that's exactly what happens. What happens is the network it has access to is not the host network, but what's called the bridge network. But चलो assume कि Docker build भी एक container के अंदर हो रहा है. Docker build is itself happening inside a container. And over there, localhost means nothing. Localhost means my Docker build container. It does not mean the Mac machine. But when I add -- network equal to host, when I add this flag, then what happens is it says कि यार अच्छा network तो मैं host machine का use करूँगा. When I am building, I am going to use the network of the host machine. So now localhost means this machine, and localhost :5432 was anyways pointing to Postgres का container 5432 where we were running the thing. So that is why just adding this much fixed our build pipeline, because Docker build को भी Postgres से connect होना है. Docker build also needs to connect to Postgres. It can't connect to Postgres directly over here unless you're running Docker build in host mode. If you're running it in host mode, तो ये host machine के 5432 पे जाएगा. It will try to access the 5432 port on the host machine, which is anyways pointing to the Postgres containers 5432 port. So you're good to go. All right, that's a good question. What else? Recap. All right. The Docker is someone said the Docker installation looks uglier than the manual installation. I agree. I think for small project it anyways won't matter. For a small Node.js project or even a monorepo, native installation works. For a cal.com like project, that scale or those many modules, packages, dependencies, it becomes a little harder. But yes, over here I agree. And partly the reason is we are using Prisma, which requires connecting to the database during the build step. I repeat, we are using Prisma, which requires connecting to the database during the build step. That is what is causing it. If I remove this line of code, which is not extraordinary, like this, well, not really. You really need, unfortunately, you need it for local development, unless you find a different way to migrate the database. So, I mean, I guess we can find other ways, but chalo. Basically, I can make it less uglier by adding a different step, by adding this npx Prisma migrate outside. But I'm not doing that just to, keep everything inside the Docker file. But yes, it does look much uglier now. Why does it look so much uglier? because we need containers to talk to each other. We need this build step. Whenever we are building the image, it needs to talk to the database. Why does it need to talk to the database? Because it needs to put tables in there. If we can somehow, and that does not, you don't need that for MongoDB. So the Docker file would have been much less uglier if we were not using MongoDB. Oh, sorry, if we were using MongoDB. This Docker file would have been much smaller, much easier, because if we were using MongoDB, you wouldn't require this line of code. You wouldn't require this. You wouldn't require this. And you wouldn't require this. And you know, this much ish would have been good enough. The Docker file would have looked like this if we were using MongoDB, or even if we were using Postgres, it would have been a problem. But if you were using MongoDB, it would have been this simpler. But since we are using Postgres, where we have to migrate the database during build, it became so hard. Why it becomes so hard? Because if you look at the Docker file, we take the base image, take the working directory, copy over the files, run npm install, copy over the rest of the files, add an environment variable to the database. This step is not needed. And then I run database URL equal to this environment variable, or you know, I can also remove this and simply do this. Either is fine. Database URL equal to this string over here, npx prisma migrate dev. This actually needs to migrate the database. It actually needs to put some tables in the database. So during this build step, whenever I am running docker build -t user projects dot, I have to specify network to host, so that what does network host means? When I am building, I want to use the host machine ka network and not a more contained network that can't access Postgres. This Docker build needs to talk to the main Mac machine, and to be able to do that, or whatever, access something on the main Mac machine, which it can do only if you're using -- network equal to host. npx prisma generate build expose npm run start. This was the Docker file, and the build seems to have been working correctly. Then the question was, how do you start the projects? And the way to start the projects is, first you have to create a network. Why do you have to create a network? You have to create a network because these are two different processes, similar to what we learned in networks. Okay, if there's a Node.js container that wants to talk to a MongoDB database, both of them are running in separate containers. To be able to talk, they need to talk through a network. So we have to first create a network. Then when we are running Postgres, we have to connect Postgres to that network, give Postgres a name, give it an environment variable, which is the password, run it in detached mode, have this port mapping, and Postgres is the image that we're running. Building the image, I already discussed. This is how you build the image. The only extra thing is -- network equal to host. And lastly, when you are starting the final container, the Node.js container, then also you have to specify the database URL, because this database URL now wants to connect to this other container. And how do containers identify each other? How do they find each other? By their name. What is the MongoDB URL here? It is not localhost :27017. It is Mongo :27017. And similarly here it will be Postgres :5432, because the name of the container here is Postgres. If I name this Postgres 2222, then I would have had to name Postgres 2222 over here as well. That's the environment variable, the database URL, the network, the same network this guy has to connect to. ये जो Postgres container है, this guy right here, and ये जो user Node.js code container है, this guy right here, they both need to be connected via the same network. And then port mapping and user project. Now do we understand it? Do we understand? Let's do another poll. Can we proceed, guys? We need to finish the Docker compose section really quickly. All right, and it is 86%. All right, so 5% ही बढ़ा तब से अब तक, but that's fine. Let's write the anyways. Hopefully, when you're creating a project locally, you are the DevRel engineer, whatever, dev productivity engineer. You are not writing this ugly long Docker installation step. You are creating a Docker Compose file and you are simply running Docker Compose. How do we create the Docker Compose file for our project? Let's try to write it. Let's try to take inspiration from P5JS web editor. Let's see what they were doing. Let's look at, let's say, we did not have access to anything. We just through references had to build a Docker Compose file. So how would I build it? Let's open their file on the right. Let's open our file on the left. Let's try to complete it. One thing that's good to add is version of Docker Compose that you're using, 3.88. I don't know what's the latest version. Docker Compose latest version. Seems like there is also 3.9. So, you can pick which one of these you want. Then you define your services. What all services do we have? What all containers do we want to run? We want to run a Postgres service. We want to run a, let's say, user underscore app service. These are the two services we want to run. Postgres service, thankfully, is simple enough. You have to write the image that you want to start, which in our case is Postgres. You have to specify the port mapping. How do you specify port mapping? Ports 5432:5432. And you can add a volume. Let's say we are not adding a volume for now. It's a good idea to do it. Let's say we are not adding volume for now. This much is actually good enough. You have created your first Docker Compose. It is not composing anything because it only has a single service right now. But in the future, you might add Redis over here. Redis image Redis and whatever ports 2739:2739, so on and so forth. Just adding a bunch of lines will let you eventually start these images, start these containers in a single command. That is why Docker Compose is powerful, especially when you have multiple services. Should we also give this a name or Mongo? All right, seems like this name might be good enough. All right, the first thing we're starting is this. What is the second service we're starting? We're starting the final, let's call it user underscore app, which we don't want to pull from Docker Hub. We want to build it locally. So rather than writing image colon over here, what are we going to write? We're going to write build colon. Okay, I actually want to build this locally and not get it from somewhere. This is the context / where I want to build it. This is the Docker file path. Maybe we don't need target here. We'll see if we need it eventually. Environment. What environment variables do we need? What environment variables was I passing over here in contributions.md? I was passing database URL equal to this, to the same environment variable I need over here. Yes, one level before. Volumes, thankfully we don't need them right now. It might be a good assignment for you to add hot reloading to this Node.js project and then to your Docker file as well. For that, you will need these volumes. But abhi our Node.js project for sure does not need any volumes. And lastly, ports, which in our case is 3000:3000. That's actually, depends on would be nice to add. Depends underscore on. This is an array of Postgres is the only thing it depends on for now. And that's how you create the Docker Compose for your new user app project. One thing looks very wrong here. Yeah, that looks wrong. This should be here, this should be here, and this should be here, and this should be here. And same for ports. It's probably an array. Is it an array? No, it's not. and depends on probably also comes over here. There you go. Sorry, the indentation was incorrect. Earlier I had this over here. It was assuming it to be a third service. Okay, Postgres is a service, user app is a service, environment is a service, but that is not the case. Environment is just the environment variables I want to pass, and that's the same thing as passing -e database URL equal to something over here. And the best part about all of this is I don't have to explicitly create a network. What made our first thing extremely ugly? What made this whole setup project so ugly is that I had to explicitly create a network. I had to attach the network to the first container and the second container. Thankfully, whenever you start services inside Docker Compose, they are automatically attached via a network. So you don't have to explicitly define that. Great. एक चीज बसी है. How do I change its, how do I make it host mode, network mode host? Basically, when we were building, we set network equal to host. So the same thing we want over here. I'm assuming it should be as simple as this. When you build, network needs to be host. All right, let's try it out. मैंने लिख तो दिया है. Of course, it will not work the first time. So let's try it out. Let me kill everything I have. Docker kill Postgres. And now let's try to follow the third approach. Install Docker. I have it on my machine. Install Docker Compose. I have it on my machine. And run Docker Compose up. That is it. Just two steps to start the project locally. Let's try to see if it works. It doesn't work. Because it says Postgres.posts must be a list. That is what I was thinking. So this should be a list. And this should be a list. Now let's try it. Because services environment should be a mapping. That does look like a mapping to me. When you write, oh sorry, my bad. Okay, makes sense. When you have multiple, actually I'm a little confused. What does dash database mean? We'll come to it. We'll do a YAML to JSON conversion and try to understand what does dash followed by this thing means. I thought dashes were an array. For example, this is modes is an array. Okay, this is the first port mapping, second port mapping, third port mapping, so on and so forth. What is dash a equal to b? That shouldn't be a mapping because mapping is this. A equal to a colon b, c colon d. But we'll just convert it to a JSON and see. Let's try to build it again, and seems like it is building. Let's wait for it to finish, and of course it fails. It fails with the same thing. Yeah, this is going to get complex because हमें चाहिए, we want कि when this is building, even before this is building, this should be running. And I think जब आप Docker Compose define करते हो and when you're building something, first all the builds will happen and only then the starts will happen. But we want कि even before this guy builds, this guy should start. We don't want कि we have already written depends on Postgres. We have written this depends on Postgres. तो ये start तो नहीं होगा. This will not start until Postgres starts. But build इसका पहले रन होगा. First this will build, then this will start, and then this will start. We want कि पहले ये start हो. First this starts, then this builds, and then this starts. I don't know if you can do that. Seems like a very specific use case. But let's see if we can. Let's build Docker Compose depends on service. Nope. How can one make Docker Compose build depend on another service? That is exactly what we want. This should now technically be possible. Like, this is a very weird use case, but let's say it is possible now. Using the service completed successfully condition, which is a long form depends on option. Okay, Condition under which a dependency is considered satisfied. Long syntax example. Depends on service name, condition. Okay, let's see. Okay, there you go. Depends on Postgres condition service completed successfully. So let's try that. During our build, I repeat, during our build, we want to depend on Postgres key condition being service completed successfully. Only if Postgres is completed successfully should the specific, build step run. Let's try that now. It's not allowed. Build dot network mode host. Hold on. Web build. Okay, hold on. Because they will conflict. Okay, so this might just be it. Let's try that. Docker compose up. Still seems like it's building it first. I'll open chat if someone has already done it, but it seems like it's still building it first before Postgres starts. That might not have fixed it. Again, if you were using MongoDB, then this would have almost just worked. Most probably it chal jata. But since we're using Postgres with Prisma, and during the build step, we need to talk to the database. Similarly, we are facing issues here. So, we'll see how it's fixed. Same problem right here, that did not fix it. Let's try one last thing. Build dot network mode host. And then the depends on condition. I don't think this should change anything, and yeah, it doesn't. Oh no, right. Is there a health check? Nope. Where's the Docker file? Image Postgres Alpine, restart always. Nope, nothing else that I've missed here. Okay, let's Google this. How to start service? Only another service is completed. You don't want to start. Build. Okay, I'll spend 2 more minutes here. Then I'll open chat and maybe you guys can help me with it. Build Docker compose depends on service. That's exactly what we want. What could we do? I mean, I can think of a few things, I say. Yeah, let's do this. Oh, that's probably what every project does. And I'm just dumb to not do it already. Start should do a npx prisma migrate dev and npx. Yeah. All right. Yeah, this should have been enough. Let's remove our dependency from our Docker compose. Docker file. Let's make sure कि Docker file को database से बात ही ना करनी पड़े. I am removing the npx prisma migrate dev wala step from the Docker file and moving it to this start script, or I would probably name this the dev :docker script. So I'm going to name this the dev :docker script. I'm going to replace this over here in Docker file dev :docker. And now ये जो database को migrate करने वाला step है ना, this step to migrate the database happens when the container starts, and when the container starts, database is already up. I repeat, when the container starts, since we have the, oops, 1 second, charging. sorry. What I was saying was, we already have the depends on condition over here. तो ये चीज तो पक्की है कि यूजर ऐप विल ओनली स्टार्ट आफ्टर दिस गाय स्टार्ट्स. तो मैंने क्या किया, इन माय डॉकर फाइल I removed any dependency from the database. I don't want to talk to the database. It is complicating, the Docker file, the Docker installation steps, the Docker compose a lot. So I said, I will not migrate the database during the Docker build. I will migrate it when the Docker image starts. I think we do the same thing in CMS, and probably this is the reason. If you open package.json here and you look at dev::docker or maybe Docker, Prisma Docker. Yeah, we have Prisma Docker over here, which runs npx Prisma migrate and npx Prisma db seed, a bunch of things. This one being the important one, it migrates database. This seeds some data inside it. This starts a UI for interacting with it. But इसमें भी अगर तुम देखो कि the dev docker command is what first migrates the database and then runs in next dev. So here also we've done the same thing, and probably for the same reason, to not complicate Docker file, even though I did not write it. But suddenly it clicked to me that in CMS we also do something similar. We don't migrate the database inside the Docker file, we migrate it outside when the container actually starts. So now, if I look at the Docker compose file, that looks fine. And now since our Docker file is not talking to the database, we actually don't even need this. Yeah, this much should be good enough. Let's try to run Docker compose up and see if it runs this time. थोड़ा overwhelming हो गया तो I'll of course answer Q&A / whatever, take another class, whatever you want. All right, that looks decentish. That built the image, that started the first container, that started the second container. Everything is fine other than the fact that database is uninitialized and super user password is not specified. Oh, did I not pass in Postgres password as an environment variable to Postgres? I did not. So let me add environment Postgres password equal to the same password that's been passed over here. Let's try it again. Yep, seems to be working. Let me go to localhost :3000 and I see nothing. I see port mapping here. Wait, database system was shut down at this thing. Wait, unknown command dev docker. Oh, my bad. Docker file, replace this with npm run dev docker. Let's try it again. Failed again. Did you mean unknown command dev::docker? Did you mean this npm run dev::docker? How are they different? Package.json dev::docker. यहाँ पे running npm run dev::docker. Run the dev::docker package script to see. Wait, why is this failing? Unknown. Come on. npm run dev::docker. There's nothing wrong here. Not that I can think of. Yes, Docker images. I'm assuming it's the cache that's causing it, but I of course could be wrong. Docker kill this thing. Sorry, Docker RMI this thing. Force. Let's try it one more time. Docker build. Sorry, not this. Docker -compose up. Let's see if it fixes it this time. Yeah, seems like it did. Prisma loaded from this thing, loaded from this thing. Yeah. All right, that looks good. Localhost colon 3000. I see an empty array. If I open Postman and try to post a bunch of times and go back here, I see the data over here. So chal gaya. It is working for me now. All I have to do in my machine is run a single command, docker compose up, and the project would start completely on my project, on my local machine. So if I go to contribute.md now, I can also make these a little bit simpler now. मैं कर नहीं रहा हूँ, but Docker installation can also become a little simpler now. Normal installation, of course, is a little not too heavy, but a little heavy. But Docker Compose installation is so simple. Install Docker and Docker Compose on your machine and run Docker Compose up. The project will start running on your machine with Postgres and with the code that you've written. What did I change? One very important thing I changed. One very important thing that made all of this logic very ugly, that was going to make all the Docker Compose logic very ugly. I changed that thing. What was that thing? That thing was our Docker file was originally talking to the database. We were migrating our database inside the Docker file. When you have two different containers, one of them running the database, other one currently being built, ये जो build हो रहा है container, making it talk to an already running container is a little hard. We saw that. You have to run the build in host mode. In Docker Compose, it was getting even more difficult. So what did we do? We extracted this step and we moved it over here to dev::docker. ये जो final script run होगी, whenever the container actually starts, the script that will run, that will migrate the database. What will that do? Since Docker Compose में हमने डाल रखा है, we have already written कि user app depends on Postgres. So when user app starts, Postgres will 100% be on, and hence you can just talk to Postgres and migrate it. That is how we have, fixed this specific error. So do we understand this now? Let's do a poll. थोड़ा सा तो overwhelming है वैसे, but I hope if you look at the code, it's like straightforward. Docker Compose setup push. Let's do a poll, guys. कितना समझ आया? Do we understand? या फिर हालत खराब? Do we understand what we learned in the last 30 minutes, which is setting up Docker Compose for your not even a mono repo right now, a simple project which has a backend and a database. In the future, we'll have backend front-end database. उसके बाद backend front-end database WebSockets. Then more and more complex. Yeah, that's not bad actually. 80% is decent. So I'll look at Q&A now. 77% हो गया. Class is officially done. I'm going to look at Q&A and try to answer. The project link is here, which you should try to read through some of the things that are written in the project. That will probably explain it much better than I have. This is a simple full stack project. And whenever a new contributor comes here, they can open contribute.md and see, oh, very difficult steps. Oh, so difficult steps. Oh, so easy steps. So they will probably prefer this. How did we set this up? Number one, we updated package.json to not have a start script, but a dev::docker script. Jisme we first migrated the database and then ran node-index.js. So we actually put the tables in the database, then ran node-index.js. Then we wrote the Docker file, which is as simple as it gets now. So up to इसमें कुछ difficult है ही नहीं. From the base image working directory, copy the packages, npm install, copy the rest of it, generate the client, build the TypeScript code to JavaScript code, expose this port, npm run dev::docker. So Docker file तो बहुत simple है. The new thing we learned today is Docker Compose. What did we learn in Docker Compose? When you're writing a Docker Compose file, you can define multiple services. Firstly, what is this format? This is YAML. What is YAML? It is very similar to JSON. Lets you define key value pairs, arrays, strings, things like these. जैसे आप JSON लिखते हो वैसे आप YAML लिख सकते हो. So the version is 3.8. Services.postgres.image. What image are we running? Postgres from Docker Hub. This is the port mapping. This is the environment variable to pass in a password. This would eventually convert to this command only. It will not have, of course, this, and it would convert to this command only. Docker run name Postgres, environment variable this thing, port mapping this thing, and Postgres. So all of these sort of unfurl into Docker commands or whatever similar things that are happening in the Docker engine to start an image. And similarly, the second one is our application, the user app, where we don't need this anymore. But we don't have an image. We want to build it. The context is the current folder. The Docker file is called Docker file. We can name it something else, dockerfile.local or something like that. These are the environment variables. Notice I have not written localhost over here. I've written Postgres. Why? Because Postgres is the name of my other container that I'm starting. And they're both connected by a network, which I did not have to specify. वो automatically हो जाता है in a Docker Compose file. All the services that you're writing are all connected together via a network. And that is why I can find this Postgres container from my backend using Postgres, this string. अगर मैं यहाँ पे कुछ और लिखता, if I would have written Postgres 2222, then I would have to identify it as Postgres 2222. Port mapping and depends on is the only other thing. Okay, this should only start running when this has succeeded a health check. Cool. That's how you write a Docker Compose file. Cool. Let's do Q&A. I'll just open chat and do questions now. So class is officially done. Mildly overwhelming of a class. I would urge you to go through the recordings. If not the recordings, at least this repository, and try to create your own maybe MongoDB plus Node.js plus TypeScript project where you write the Docker Compose yourself. Maybe add an extra service in there like Redis or Kafka or Postgres or MySQL, so on and so forth. All right, cool. Let's do a poll. Oh, sorry, not a poll. Let's look at Q&A. Chat is closed. डॉकर कंपोजर डॉकर फाइल में वर्क डायरेक्टरी कैसे वर्क कर रही है जब आप स्लैश ऐप कभी और कुछ कॉन्टेक्स्ट में भी? सो वर्किंग डायरेक्टरी इज डिफरेंट फ्रॉम कॉन्टेक्स्ट. वर्किंग डायरेक्टरी इन द डॉकर फाइल एज द नेम सजेस्ट इज आपको कहां करना है कॉपी. जब आप कॉपी कॉल कर रहे हो, व्हेन यू आर कॉलिंग कॉपी, वेयर शुड आई कॉपी दिस? हियर. दैट इज व्हाट द वर्किंग डायरेक्टरी इज. दैट इज डिफरेंट फ्रॉम कॉन्टेक्स्ट इन डॉकर कंपोज. डॉकर कंपोज में कॉन्टेक्स्ट इज कि डॉकर कंपोज फाइल यहां है, इसका कोड यहां पर है. सो इट माइट हैपन कि आई हैव अ रूट फोल्डर जहां पे मैं सिर्फ डॉकर कंपोज का रखूं. आई रिपीट, इट माइट हैपन कि my project becomes like this. Everything is inside the code folder, but the Docker Compose is outside. Docker Compose is outside, everything inside the code folder. तो अब मैं कह सकता हूँ कि the context of everything I want to build is in the code folder. Code folder के अंदर सब कुछ है, वहीं से सब कॉपी करना है. तो if you are structuring your project in a way in which Docker Compose is present separately, it's not present in the root folder. That is where this context comes into the picture, and it's nothing related to the work directory. How to observe DB if we used Avian for our projects like in NeonDB? Directly have options to see. I have no idea. I've never used Avian, but PSQL is always a way. Okay, in your machine install PSQL, then simply run PSQL space your Postgres database string. It's not a GUI, but it's similar. And if not this, there's something called pgadmin that lets you do what you're asking. It's a GUI for Postgres. Upload recording after class. I will do that immediately. And what else? Notion docs. I have a node application that I'm running to use MQTT for different connections, but I'm storing those subscribe PIDs in an array and backend does not correct. What should I store that subscribe PIDs, Redis, Kafka or something? ये क्वेश्चन मुझे बिल्कुल नहीं समझ आया भाई. Firstly, what is an MQTT? MQTT. Oh, it's something related to IoT. ठीक है. I have a node application and in that I'm using MQTT for different connections, but right now I'm storing those subscribe PIDs in an array of that backend, which is not correct, and I should use to store that subscribe. What do you mean when you say PIDs here? Do you mean process IDs or something else? Can you elaborate your question a little bit? I'm sure it's an interesting question, but I don't understand it very well right now, and partly because I don't know what MQTT is, but I'm assuming it's just a protocol to talk to for an IoT device to talk to the outside world or something else. So let me know what that is, and maybe frame your question a little bit more and let me know what would you mean by PIDs over here. I'm assuming process IDs. Okay, I thought maybe understand. Okay, maybe this protocol requires you to specify the process IDs and not the URL for Postgres, but reconfirm that for me and then re-ask the question. How to observe DB? Okay, answered that. Notion doc. Someone mentioned conditions the started might have worked. Why steps will be lesser in MongoDB versus Postgres? Because MongoDB doesn't require you to explicitly migrate the database. Whenever you are using MongoDB, you never specify the tables, the database anywhere. You don't have to run a specific command to actually create the tables. वो खुद ही create हो जाते हैं when your application is running. In Postgres or in SQL tables, you have to specifically have a migration step where you're actually migrating the database. That migration step for us was first happening in Dockerfile. I repeat, that migration step was first happening here. Then we eventually moved it to package.json here. But ये step की आपको जरूरत ही नहीं पड़ेगी. You will not need this step if you're using MongoDB. If you're using SQL tables, then you would. Please read full and slowly. I have deployed a project where there will be Philo files in package directory. Install.sh. Properties.photoshop hai kya ye? What is .ps? Docker compose file and some tar files for Docker images. Okay. We just had to add required secrets in properties.ps file and run install.sh. It would inject secrets in required containers in config.json file. How can we achieve something like this where we are using images locally without pushing to Docker Hub and inject values in container while setting up? I have deployed a project where there are the following files in a directory: install.sh, properties. Assume this is a config file only, Docker compose and some tar files for Docker images. We just had to add required secrets in properties.ps file. Oh, now I get what you're doing. So yeah, great point. What you can do, this is one thing that I can think of immediately, is create a new Docker file on top of your old Docker file. So you have all of your Docker images. Base image local Docker. Especially you have local image called blah, you can just do from blah. Perfect. So if you have a local image that's, or not local image, you have a tar file, right? You said local tar file Docker image, base image. Can I use a Docker file saved as a tar file in my Docker file as a parent image? Exactly my question. And the answer is, this is also fine. This is what you can do, sir. सबसे पहले load your image, which means, I would assume uske baad that image is available over here. So whatever your tar image is, you don't have to push it anywhere. Keep it locally, but just load it so that you can see it over here, Docker images. Then put that as a base image in a new Docker file from random, whatever the name of your base image is. Then write the code to actually, whatever, change the, let's say the /app/config.js file is what you want to change. /inject, you said what was the file? config.json or something like that. So, run whatever. There are many ways to update a file. Let's say one of them is, echo open API _ key equal to your open API key, and just override that to config.json. You can make this cleaner / add multiple variables here, so on and so forth. But this is just one way to update the file, config.json file, and whatever is your final command that starts in this random image, started over here. If there's nothing, then just run an infinite for loop over here and you're good to go. Now, when you build this, you have a new image which is built on top of your old image, which has whatever you wanted to overwrite in there. Unless you create a new image, I don't think there's any easy way or a clean way to change variables during the build step. That is what you want, right? You want कि जब मेरा build हो रहा है, at that point I need OpenAPI keys here. So you will have to create a new Docker file which depends on your old tar files and go from there. तो ये समझ आया? This is a good question and I'm curious to know if this solves your problem. I'm refreshing this. Can you chat over here and tell me / paste over here if this fixed for you? I'll keep this open. Looks pretty decent. Very highly animated thingy. So Docker networks, I'll keep it small only since you asked for a small recap. These slides cover it fairly well. In Docker, a network is a powerful feature that allows you containers to communicate with each other. By default, अगर आप 2 containers start कर रहे हो, if I start Docker run Postgres and if I start Docker run Mongo, something like that. Postgres is not running right now because I haven't passed environment variable. Mongo है नहीं मेरे पास. But if I start 2 of these images, containers, they can't talk to each other. To be able to make them talk to each other, you need to connect them via a network. So what is a network? A network is another Docker construct that you use. You start a network, and then whenever you're starting containers, you connect them to a network. That way, if this container wants to talk to this container, then it can find the other container through its name. इसका नाम अगर Mongo है, तो I can access it via Mongo. And this happens because both of them are attached to the same network. That is what a network is. But again, class covers it in fair detail. Did this fix it for you? I don't. .ps file has key value pairs and config.json will have multiple files. We just need to copy various values from ps. So that's fine, right? I mean, that's not too difficult. You have to write a bash script. You have to write some code over here. Or, in your right next to a Docker file, add a script.sh, जिसके अंदर you are writing all the code to copy everything from .ps file to config.js file. That's more of a bash challenge than a Docker challenge or a DevOps challenge. But if you don't know scripting very well, create a JavaScript file, right? Create a node, so index.js file, which first does a fs.read const fs equal to require fs, and then does a fs.read file, whatever your file was, .ps wali properties.ps, and then you write the logic to parse that data over here, and then you write it to fs.write file, the other file which was config.json. And simple, you call this index.js file in your Docker file. यहाँ पे just run node index.js. That's simple enough. Let me know if not. I'll refresh in a while. Where is, okay, you probably posted an answer here. I'll look at that. Any chosen reason boundaries in crypto? Taxes. Like I can't expense them. In college coding live, did you use Mac or Windows? I used Windows until my second semester, and then I did a dual boot. Did you decrease school fees from 1916 and career pages is empty and Sargam HCing going to be teachers there? HCing probably not, just a mentor. Sargam most probably, but we'll see. There are some qualifications teachers need to have. And he's a great student, but he's a great teacher, but also you have to make sure they have some qualifications. So for that reason, he might not be an official teacher. We are trying, but we will see. You make it was always 16. Should say it was decided 16 as in I'm still hovering. It really depends on the person. Fees will sort of increase soon enough, like in a month when a lot of people come in or whatever. But I think it's 12 plus 4. Fathom, but there's a scenario Zoom and Google could bring those features, right? Sure. I mean, YouTube can always bring 100 different things that would take startups down, but they move very slowly, so it doesn't happen. and Zoom already has that. It's nothing new. This is like there's a different mode in Fathom, and figure out what that is and tell me. How are TV software apps made? There are SDKs. For example, latent app may we were building fire caster thingy slash that you can Android TV, something like that. I wasn't building it, but someone was. So there are SDKs that let you connect to TVs and talk to them. I have been following Rasool Camp yesterday class. It's more than enough. Is there something wrong? I don't know. So there was something, yeah, Feb 13 May. Just fill it and most probably there'll be a form that Ayush will post. Just fill the form. Why do consultancy firm like saying what do they do? I have no idea. Cohort by cohort reaching or joining your team will be difficult, right? As open source projects, you are less active on cohort 2 and you will do something else to reach you. I don't know. I think people still differentiate, but I don't know. Probably not. I think cohort 3 much easier to get access versus cohort 2. Oh boy. Why are we reducing JWT on WebSocket server? Instead, stopping HTTP server is good, right? No. They're independent servers. ये HTTP server है, ये WebSocket server है. I am a browser. I can independently connect to the WebSocket server. I should identify myself to the WebSocket server. HTTP serवर को भी करना चाहिए. कल को कोई थर्ड सर्विस आई उसको भी करना चाहिए. सबको I should send my JWT because every service I need to identify myself to. If you go to a different country, you show your password there, right? And then you go to a different country, you show your password there. So every service you need to identify to yourself. You need to identify yourself, and that's why you shouldn't allow authorized access to even the WebSocket server. Can you not send request in pure WebSocket server to the user that you are unauthorized or something? So we are closing our connection instead of HTTP. Oh, you mean before upgrading the request? Yes, you can do that. Even before you upgrade the request to HTTP, you can stop the user right there. And yes, you should do that. You should not wait for the WebSocket connection to even start. I agree. Good point. Could not understand this logic. Let's see. Ye wala. Yeah. So this is, if I'm trying to send a chat, this is the room ID that I'm trying to send it. This is the message that I'm trying to send. For all the users that are currently connected to the server, if that user's rooms array contains this room ID, मुझे ये message room ID physics में भेजना है. तो all the users में जो user physics ID room में है, उस user के WebSocket connection को भेजो. What does this mean? Or what does this logic say? It says that someone tried to send a chat message this to room ID this, and how do we process it? We iterate over all the users and we say अगर इस user ने इस room ID को access किया हुआ है इसको भेज दो. If this user has access to this ID, send him this one and so. All right. Oh, भाई तो काफी लंबा है. मैं आता हूँ इस पे भाई. Very specific questions. Let me come back to them. Bunch of projects from a Nepali guy, which we love Nepali guys here. So I mean, just DM me your projects and we can go from there. Collab sketch, that looks really good. Looks very close to Accelerator. No sessions, this is pretty good. All right. You give me $100 bounty. All right, let's see. Let's see what you did. Oh, are they like 10 PRs? Did Yash not review this? And also your UI looks very similar to Yash's. So did he copy yours or did you copy his? When were your commits? 2 days ago. And when did Yash merge his PR? Landing page clerk. This was yesterday. Why do UIs of both of you look very similar? Razorpay and Stripe. Where was this? I mean, I'll have either way do the bounty. I mean, I'll just have to find who did it first and give it to them. But my question is, अरे बाप रे कहाँ गया? Close. Oh shit! Did I close the right one? Nope. Nope. No. No. HTTP. Hold on. This is the Nginx conf for Accelerator. For the WebSocket server, I have assigned HTTP localhost 1000, but actually running it on WS localhost 1000 on prod environment. It runs on this thing. Then does this work? Cause WebSocket is running on my project, but in Nginx I have assigned HTTP. I don't understand this question. This is the nginx.conf that you have. You have server name, SSL certs, location star proxy over here. So you are saying the third one, this one right here, collab.ws.milkin.in, and you have a proxy pass to HTTP localhost 3000. Now what is your question? I have assigned HTTP, but it's actually running on. So okay, I get it. You are asking कि मैंने तो यहाँ WS डाला ही नहीं हरकीरत. Is that what you're asking? I did not put WS protocol over here. Then how is it proxying it to WS? And the answer is WebSocket protocol, if you remember, is originally an HTTP protocol that is eventually upgraded to a WebSocket protocol. So whenever you have, a WebSocket connection, the first request that's actually going out is HTTP. So when that request reaches Nginx, since it is an HTTP request, it gets proxy to wherever you want, in this case, to your WebSocket server. That is good. How do you do it? I would just look at the project, try to set it up, look at issues, try to create some myself, talk to the developers, maintainers, and contribute. How to deploy a project which has two different GitHub repos, front end and back end. You have two folders on your VM. If you're using the ugliest way to deploy, which is to use a VM, clone the front end repo there, clone the back end repo there, start the two projects, put Nginx in front, put cert what khatam. So not too difficult. Where did that specific one go though? The person was asking for the bounty. Let me open all of these. What was his PR? Back. And back. Yeah, that one. So 26 file changes here, and let's see, payment modal.tsx, payment Stripe, and Yash Mokija sir. Log one. Payment modal.tsx. They're not the same, but they looked very similar. Or are they? I don't know. Yeah, they're not. I don't know. Is AI getting too similar for everyone? Is everyone using AI to code? Basically, on photo.100xdev.com, I'll do a bounty for you either way. I'll split the bounty between 2-3 people who did Razorpay. What was I saying? Yeah, like this model and this model is surprisingly similar for everyone. For the one that's currently merged and the one that this guy has, they're very close. And is it because two models, as you can see, left and right, and here also two models left and right, and when you open, there's this model over here, and this guy also opened pay with Stripe, pay with Razorpay, pay with Stripe, pay with Razorpay. So that's very funny. It's probably because both of them have used AI to code, I would assume. So the UX is so similar. But haan, theek hai, this looks good. And let me, Yash already merged his own, but let me do a, let me just check if someone else also had this before you. So I just know who all to split it with, but I'll do a bounty. Well, seems like there are other people who've done it before you. There's this guy, and I guess that's it. So let me look at his PR. Also looks much similar. Not that it is useful, because we were yeah, either way it's fine. Since you asked for it, I'll do a $50 bounty for you and $50 for the other guy. Chalo, we'll call it here slash bounty. I'll have to close this. Someone also created a very nice front end, which I would like to give a small bounty to. They tweeted about it, but I don't see it here. Make dashboard better. Let's see. I can't say this is significantly better. Again, seems heavily AI generated. I could be wrong, but okay, so let's not go here. Cool. Any other questions? Anything I'm missing? All right. Oh हाँ, आपके लंबे सारे डाउट्स तो रह गए भाई. ये बहुत ही लंबा दिमाग खराब करोगे तुम एकदम. TAs are here, guys, to help you guys. Very long doc. Here we are basically extracting room ID from the request body, but in line number 66 you wrote filter logic and you're actually not filtering because you're using double equal to instead of not equal to. Yeah, you're right. That logic is incorrect. Seems like we did not. You're right. Seems like we did not test that endpoint enough. The leave room endpoint. That's why this wasn't tested. But yes, that is incorrect. That should be not equal to. So you're perfectly right. I don't think it would have worked as expected. I think we never sent this event from the front end. We never tested this. Ki to bas dal diya hai, and then that's why it did work. You are right. You're not wrong. That's so funny. So, try calling the leave room event, try logging user.rooms, and you will see, yes, indeed, this is problematic, and the logic here is incorrect. It should be not equal to and equal to, and it should be not equal to, and should not be equal to. Video, you said you will do a detailed video on how it is working, what is working, on how what is working. Oh, like how there is something else aside, which is how do you scale this application is a good discussion to have. Is that what you're asking? If yes, that will come when we reach advanced backend. If you're asking about how can you, I don't know, you're asking how do you think before start a project, I don't know if there's a very easy video for it, but happy to create one once we have the time, eventually. अरे भाई इतना ज़्यादा लंबा बहुत ज़्यादा बात करते हो आप. Can I get in touch with next devs? Not yet. I think we are over provisioned at the moment. That is cool, but not the best thing in the world to do unpaid internships. I'll still follow you. Oh, I'm already following you. Cool. Check it out. That looks very good. Nice. Guest login. Yeah, pretty decent. Like nothing too fancy, nothing too basic. Also somewhere in the middle. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this was happening for a while, so nothing new. Create React app was not maintained for a really long time, so they just appreciated it. I mean, name it something fancy like Astronity. That's like a fancy name. Something similar would be nice. So just think of the weirdest name, like LinkedIn is such a great name, or even Astronity is such a great name, or V0 is such a great, something random is always something that works. So I would pick like a random name over here. Cool. We'll call it here, guys. Thank you all for joining. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye bye. Okay. Stop recording.